2014 was a period of increased Russian pressure on Crimea, and Russia's aim was to seize Crimea completely. In 2022, the outbreak of the Russian-Ukrainian war further intensified these sanctions, which have continued to the present day. Similar sanctions were imposed on Iran, and its economy contracted by 40%. However, when we look at Russia, it does not seem to have been affected that much by the sanctions. In fact, the Russian economy grew by 3.6% in 2023, outperforming the G7 countries. Of course, the Russian economy has been volatile in recent years, but the fact that it has managed to survive despite such numerous and powerful influences shows the country's economic resilience and adaptability. In this video, we will discuss: how did the Russian economy continue to grow despite the sanctions? Why did the sanctions against Russia fail? What were the mistakes of Western countries? What are the sanctions against Russia? What is the current state of the Russian economy? The sanctions imposed after Russia's policy targeted mostly the financial, energy, and defense sectors. By restricting financial transactions in the West, Russia's major banks such as VTB, Sberbank, and Gazprombank suffered major losses. Companies such as ExxonMobil stopped their projects in Russia and withdrew from the country. The military and defense industry has also been severely affected. Russian imports of weapons and technological devices have been banned from entering the country. Sanctions have not only affected the state but also individuals. The assets of business people and companies in Europe were frozen, and travel bans were imposed. As a result of the slowing Russian economy, the ruble has depreciated significantly. In 2013, the ruble was 30 to 35 against the dollar, but as a result of the sanctions, it rose to 80 rubles. Russia has taken steps to reduce its dependence on foreign imports in order to recover the economy. It imposed an embargo on food imports from the US and European countries. As investments and imports were cut, the domestic agricultural sector was given great support. After reducing its imports and exports with the sanctioning countries, it started to turn to different markets. Exports were made to markets such as China, Turkey, the Middle East, and Africa. Russia was a wheat importer before the sanctions were imposed. However, despite these crises over the years, it has become one of the largest wheat exporters as of 2020. The main exports of the Russian economy were gas and oil. Russia provided 30% of the world's oil and natural gas supplies. The fall in oil and natural gas prices led Russia to develop new strategies. It reduced its exports from Europe and sold more oil and gas to China, India, and Asian markets, thus reducing the impact of sanctions. Russia invested heavily in liquefied natural gas production and increased its LNG export capacity with the Yamal LNG and Arctic LNG projects. As a result of the sanctions, Russia became one of the largest wheat exporters, while expanding its oil and natural gas export markets and sending the following message to Europe: we are not dependent on you, you are dependent on us. In 2021, we can see that the Russian economy is still growing. The economy grew by 5.6%, and the inflation rate remained around 8.9%. However, in 2022, after Russia declared war on Ukraine, the US and European countries started to impose tougher sanctions. In 2022, a package of 9 sanctions against Russia was announced, and these sanctions were gradually toughened. One of the main sanctions has been trade sanctions. Europe has largely banned natural gas and oil imports from Russia, while the US has cut them off completely. However, these sanctions did not affect the Russian economy as much as expected. This is because Russia has redirected its natural resource exports to other markets. Exports were made to countries such as China, Turkey, and India, and gas and oil bought cheaply in these markets were processed and sold to Europe. In other words, the sanctions imposed by Europe seem to have had a negative impact on their own economies, rather than harming Russia. Another important sanction was the exclusion of some major Russian banks from the SWIFT system. While this did not mean a complete break in relations, it did make international money transfers more difficult and delayed. However, some countries in Europe opposed this decision. The reason for their opposition was that Russia was indebted to many European banks. When Russia was removed from the SWIFT system, these debts would be difficult to collect due to problems with transfers. Russia then set up its own alternative SPFS system and continued international money transfers using China's CIPS system. After the withdrawal of Visa and MasterCard from Russia, the Russian government promoted local mirror payment cards and made them available in many countries. Sales of high-tech products, semiconductors, and aircraft parts to Russia have been halted. Since Russia is not a very technologically advanced country, it was forced to invest heavily in this area. Perhaps one of the most talked about issues in the world was the withdrawal of big companies like Apple, McDonald's, Visa, and MasterCard from Russia. But interestingly, Interestingly, many embargoed products are still available on Russian markets. The government has changed the names of brands in response to these sanctions. Instead of directly importing technological products such as telephones and automobiles, it has started to import Western goods through third countries using the parallel import system. For example, Germany did not sell cars to Russia under sanctions, imported cars from Russia, China, and India. It also started importing cars from Kazakhstan, Azerbaijan, and Kyrgyzstan, which the Germans had been selling to these countries. As a result, trade between Germany and Russia decreased by 47%, while trade with Kyrgyzstan increased by 1,900%. After 2022, as a result of the sanctions imposed, the Russian ruble depreciated significantly. It rose as high as 120 against the dollar in March 2022. However, thanks to the capital controls imposed by the Bank of Russia and rising energy prices, the ruble recovered and fell to 52.5 in June 2022. One of the biggest reasons why the ruble did not depreciate against the dollar and the euro was the pegging of the Russian ruble to gold. At the beginning of 2022, 1 ounce of gold was equal to 5,000 Russian rubles. Just like in the Bretton Woods system, the Russian ruble was indexed to gold, and this prevented the ruble from depreciating. Because Russia is one of the world's largest gold producers, after that, Russia turned more towards yuan, gold, and other currencies instead of dollars and euros. In order to minimize unemployment rates in the country, large investments were made in the defense industry, and industrial production was maintained by opening thousands of new workplaces. One of the main reasons why Russia is still largely unaffected is the many mistakes made by the sanctioning countries. The late and disorganized imposition of sanctions has strengthened Russia's hand. If the harshness of the 2022 sanctions had been in place in 2014, Russia's ability to withstand sanctions could have been prevented. For example, the embargo on the import of thousands of products into Russia. These products were supposed to be inspected at customs to prevent them from entering the country, but the large number of imported products made inspection difficult and increased the number of smuggled products. Another mistake was the delay in removing Russia from the SWIFT system. If it had not been too late and the removal from SWIFT had taken place in 2014 to 2015, Russia would not have been able to establish its own alternative SWIFT system, increase its trade relations with China, and develop its own payment system, MIR. More important was Europe's decision to reduce its imports of natural resources from Russia. This was indeed the right decision, but it was made without turning to alternative energy sources, which led to higher energy prices and inflation in Europe. Another failure was the failure to prevent Russia from developing alternative trade routes. Russia shifted its trade route to the east and the global south, concluding trade agreements with China, India, Turkey, Iran, the UAE, etc., and continued to access Western technologies through parallel imports. Another overlooked issue was the underestimation of Russia's propaganda power. The West wanted to portray Putin as an enemy in the country, but this turned out to be the opposite. The government and the media hid the effects of the sanctions from the public. The West actively used the weapon of propaganda in this process. Yes, all this has indeed kept Russia afloat, but how long can this go on? How sustainable are Russia's expenditures to change the whole system and the economic costs of the war? As of 2024, Russia's economy is experiencing imbalances. According to Russia, the economy grew by 4.1% in 2024. However, the biggest reason for this growth is the spending on the defense industry. In other words, this growth does not reflect reality. Normally, the flow of money to defense spending leads to cuts in social spending and a contraction in civilian sectors. Years of war, defense spending, and sanctions have driven up interest rates in banks, increased inflation, and reduced people's purchasing power. Looking ahead to 2025, the Russian economy is expected to slow down. Economic Development Minister Maxim Rechnikov has stated that economic growth is no longer at the forefront and that signs of cooling are emerging in the economy. As a result, on paper, the Russian economy is growing, but in reality, this is not the case. Moreover, the sanctioning countries have started to target the regions that Russia uses as alternatives. For example, tougher sanctions, such as blocking trade through third countries, tightening exports of components for drones and missile systems, and controlling indirect transactions through China and India, are increasingly challenging Russia. There are now 3 possible endings to this story. The sanctions deepen and Russia falls into an economic crisis. Trade ties with China, India, Turkey, and other countries strengthen. Russia continues to circumvent sanctions by developing parallel imports, crypto, and alternative finance. That's all for this video. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like the video. See you